This presentation provides guidance and training for LEAs completing the ESSA Consolidated Compliance Report for Title IV, Part A. This presentation is intended solely to provide general information and guidance to Texas LEAs, ESCs, nonprofit subgrantees, and participating private schools receiving equitable services. The content in this presentation reflects the TEA's current understanding of statute and applicable federal guidance. The content of this presentation is subject to change as a result of future guidance and/or other updates provided by federal agencies with regulatory oversight of these programs. This presentation does not constitute legal advice, and entities are therefore advised to seek legal counsel regarding the information and guidance provided in this presentation before acting upon the information provided. LEAs will use the Title IV Part A compliance report to submit required district-wide data annually. LEAs should report only expenditures and activities paid with Title IV Part A funds during the compliance report grant year. Funds utilized from other programs through funding transferability and the Rural Education Achievement Program, or REAP, should be included in the expenditure amounts for Title IV Part A. Now the presentation will move through the 5 parts of the Title IV Part A Compliance Report. Part 1, Funding Transferability. Part 2, Section 5211, Rural Education Achievement Program. Part 3, Expenditures and Use of Funds. Part 4, Program Compliance Self-Check. And Part 5, Additional Information, which is optional. Documenting overall compliance for a program requirement may require several forms of documentation to be maintained locally and available upon request by TEA and/or an auditor. The compliance items listed are a selection of program compliance requirements for compliance reporting purposes, and not an all-inclusive listing of all the requirements of a particular program. For a complete listing of all the program compliance requirements, the LEA may review the program-specific and ESSA provisions and assurances. Additional guidance concerning program requirements may be found in the Title IV Part A Program Guide and the ESSA Title IV Part A Statute. This is a screenshot of the eGrant system, where you may find the PR3107 compliance report. The LEA can click on the compliance reports to access the PR3107 for Title IV Part A. The Title IV Part A compliance report may be found in the eGrant system under the Grants Resources Table of Contents tab. Within the eGrant system, an LEA can view and print error and warning messages. Part 1 of PR 3107 is the Funding Transferability section. Funding transferability allows LEAs the option to transfer a certain percentage of non-administrative funds allocated for allowable uses under Title I Part A, Title I Part C, Title I Part D, Title II Part A, Title III Part A, ELA and Immigrant, and Title IV Part B. For Part 1A of the compliance report, click Yes or No to indicate whether the LEA participated in the funding transferability program with Title IV Part A funds. If an LEA selects No, Part 1 of the schedule collapse. Skip to Part 2. If yes is selected, continue to Parts 1B and 1C. If the LEA transferred funds out of Title IV Part A under Funding Transferability, type the percentage of funds redirected into each applicable fund source identified in the respective columns. Note, the sum of percentages entered in Parts 1B and 2B may not exceed 100%. If the LEA transferred funds out of Title IV Part A under Funding Transferability, type the dollar amount of expended funds that were redirected into each applicable fund source identified in the respective columns. As a reminder, LEAs may not utilize the funding transferability option for their portion of funds and only retain a portion of the Title IV Part A to support private nonprofit equitable services. If the LEA is not participating with Title IV Part A programs, the private nonprofit school may not participate in Title IV Part A equitable services. Part 2, Section 5211, is the REAP participation section of the compliance report. The Rural Education Achievement Program assists eligible LEAs in addressing academic needs more effectively by giving them greater flexibility in the use of limited federal resources. The program is designed to address the unique needs of rural school districts that frequently lack the personnel and resources needed to compete effectively for federal competitive grants and receive formula allocations in amounts too small to be effective in meeting their intended purposes. Only eligible LEAs may use the REAP option. In Part 2A, select Yes or No to indicate whether the LEA participated in REAP with Title IV Part A funds. If an LEA selects No, Part 2 collapses. The LEA then skips to Parts 3 and 4. If Yes is selected, the LEA will skip to complete Parts 2B through 2C. In 2B, type the percentage of Title IV-A funding redirected under REAP per applicable program. Part 2C, if the LEA redirected funds out of Title IV Part A under REAP, type the dollar amount of funds redirected into each applicable fund source identified in the respective columns. Please note the totals under Alternative Uses of Funds in Part 2B add up to 100%, or if the combined totals under Alternative Uses of Funding in Part 1B and under Funding Transferability in Part 1B add up to 100%, then Parts 3 and 4 of the compliance report will be disabled. As a reminder, LEAs may not REAP their portion of the funds and only retain a portion of the Title IV Part A to support private nonprofit equitable services. If the LEA is not participating with Title IV Part A programs, the private nonprofit school may not participate in Title IV Part A equitable services. Part 3 of the PR3107 compliance report collects the Title IV Part A district expenditures and use of funds for administration, activities to support well-rounded education opportunities, activities to support safe and healthy students, activities to support effective use of technology. If Part 3 is enabled, the LEA will type the total Title IV Part A expenditures per applicable category. Line 1, Administration. If the LEA used Title IV Part A funds for direct administration costs, type the amount in the expenditures column. In line 2, Activities to support well-rounded education opportunities, the LEA would type the amount spent to provide students with access to a well-rounded education. In line 3, Activities to support safe and healthy students, the LEA would type the amount spent to improve school conditions for student learning. In line 4, Activities to support effective use of technology, the LEA would type the amount spent to improve use of technology in order to improve academic achievement and digital literacy of all students. The expenditures column will automatically calculate lines 1 through 4 and populate the total. Line 5's Title IV Part A Technology Infrastructures expenditure row is capped at 15% maximum of the effective use of technology content area set aside in line 4 for all LEAs regardless of allocation amount. Part 4 is the Program Compliance Self-Check portion of the Title IV Part A Compliance Report. The LEA will complete this section to indicate compliance with each requirement. For this year, there were 3 program compliance self-check items selected in which the LEA must report compliance. Number 1, consultation. Number 2, program description. And number 3, evaluation of program effectiveness. As a reminder, LEAs must maintain documentation locally on all Title IV Part A program requirements. To meet program requirement number 1, the LEA must have engaged in a timely and meaningful consultation with Title IV Part A required stakeholders as part of the process in determining the targeted areas of improvement related to students' access to effective program activities. If compliance status is met and the LEA assures that it has documentation verifying compliance readily available upon request, the LEA will click in Compliance. A few examples of the strongest documentation recommended are agendas and/or ongoing meeting notes of stakeholder sessions, focus groups, and/or district improvement team meetings, and accompanying participant rosters, sign-in sheets, and/or ongoing meeting notes that include all required Title IV Part A stakeholders with roles identified. The LEA may have other documentation that could potentially demonstrate compliance. In the event of an audit, TEA staff will make the final determination if documentation meets the requirement. If the LEA is not in compliance, click on 1B and use the space below to indicate how the LEA plans to meet compliance of the requirement the following year. To meet program requirement number 2, the LEA To meet program requirement number 3, the LEA must have evaluated the effectiveness of the Title IV Part A program and/or activities based on the objectives and outcomes. If compliance status is met and the LEA assures that it has documentation verifying compliance readily available upon request, click on In Compliance. An example for strongest documentation recommended are relevant pages of the most current LEA's District Improvement Plan or other official auditable documentation providing a detailed description, which includes the LEA's Title IV Part A evaluation process, how the LEA will periodically evaluate effectiveness, Title IV Part A program objectives, and Title IV Part A intended outcomes of funded programs and/or activities, and accompanying attendance, sign-in sheets, and/or meeting agendas of stakeholder consultation meetings with names and identified roles pertaining to the evaluation of effectiveness in Title IV Part A programs. The LEA may have other documentation that could potentially demonstrate compliance. In the event of an audit, TEA staff will make the final determination if documentation meets the requirement. Click Not in Compliance and use the space below if documentation is not readily available, and indicate how the LEA plans to meet compliance of the requirement the following year. For Part 5, LEAs may type any additional information that is applicable to the PR3107 compliance report in the comment box below if desired. Support for assistance. Title IV Part A Compliance Report Resources. Additional Title IV Part A LEA Compliance Report Resources. LEAs may reach out to regional ESSA staff who are LEAs may also reach out to Thank you. Have a wonderful day.